Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Fio Quinn. I have been working in the field of education since 1985 as a teacher, trainer, national presenter, and developer of learning resources. I have a background in special education, assistive technology, and differentiated instruction. At present, I am an independent consultant and I collaborate with companies on different projects. For the last couple of years, I've had the pleasure and privilege to collaborate with Gayle Porter. We worked together on a version of PODD in English for the software Mind Express. Gayle Porter doesn't need an introduction. She is a worldwide known speech pathologist with more than 30 years hands-on experience working with people who have complex communication needs. Gayle currently works at the Cerebral Palsy Education Centre in Melbourne, Australia. She also has a private practice working with both children and teenagers with significant communication challenges. Gayle has authored articles, publications, and entire chapters on augmentative and alternative communication and cerebral palsy. Gayle is particularly revered for developing and publishing resources on PODD, a very effective communication system to support expression and understanding of language for people with complex communication needs. PODD, which stands for Pragmatic Organization Dynamic Display, is a way to pragmatically and dynamically organize all word and symbol vocabulary in a communication book or speech-generating device. There are PODD books, paper-based materials, and electronic versions for dedicated devices, computers, and mobile devices. Gayle offers workshops and trainings all over the world. In fact, she just got back after a month of trainings in Europe, and we are very lucky to have her with us today. So it's my pleasure to welcome Gayle Porter. Hello, Gayle. It's great to have you with us today.
It's great to be with you today, Fio.
We had some discussions in the past about your system. You told me about your training experience in Italy a few years ago at the Benedetta D'Intino Center in Milan. You had the opportunity to introduce PODD to an Italian audience. So today we are going to expand that audience because I know that many families, therapists, and educators would like to know more about your system. They always ask me, what is PODD? Who can benefit from it? And what resources are currently available in Italy? So I would like for us to get the answers directly from you, the world's creator and expert on your important experiences. Let's start with the first question, which is, what is and what is not PODD? Sometimes when I talk with someone in Italy, I hear the expression, my child uses PODD, or my child has a PODD. But then I see the system and what is called PODD has only some elements or none of a complete PODD system. Some people call PODD any type of communication system because they think that that is what PODD means. Can you clarify what is PODD?
So PODD refers to a very particular or style of organization of vocabulary in a dynamic display communication system. So that may be, as you said, a communication book or page sets for speech generating device software. It's got some very particular features, and it is common perhaps in different countries when PODD is first introduced for people to misinterpret and think that any communication book with a few pages or any device with a few pages is called a PODD, but it refers to something that is trademarked, that has very carefully designed features. So really the term PODD should only be used to reflect things that include all of those features, as translated from the English. Does that help?
Okay. Yes, it's very, very clear, certainly, yes. Another question. when did you start developing this communication system? I know you've been in the field of augmentative communication for many years and you have a lot of experience. So why did you do it? How did you start to develop PODD?
I was working at the time with children who we were attempting to use the intervention strategy of aided language stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
So for many, many years in Australia, we had used communication boards and communication books to communicate with children, varying designs and organisations. And in the early 1990s, we began to use the communication books that we had previously designed to talk to the children ourselves. And as we did that, we found many, many features that were not working as well as we thought they were when we actually started using them to try and talk to the children.
Mm-hmm.
My main aim was to, create communication systems that would work most efficiently, that
Right.
would allow the children to communicate for all their varied communication requirements, that would support their language development. So I was coming as a speech pathologist with solutions for my clinical caseload. So this was in the early 1990s, and we began to use some of the theory and some of the knowledge about what a communication system needed to have in it, and combined
Mm-hmm.
with the practical implementation.
Mm-hmm.
We gradually worked out ways that more pragmatically worked. So pragmatics being the actual use of communication, the range of reasons and purposes that you communicate, and how communication occurs within the interaction, within the discourse. And as we used this communication systems, we found the need to change them. And so those early multi-level books that we used are not PODD. Those early multi-level dynamic display page sets we designed for the speech generating devices that were just beginning to come on the market,
Mm-hmm.
they would not be PODD. They would be what we'd call pre-PODD.
Mm-hmm.
But with the use of hundreds of families over the next 15 years, we found features that worked a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure.
supported language development. And in 2007, I published the resource for direct access communication books that we developed, really thinking of the Australian market at the time, to help other people to use PODD, because we'd been through a process of, I talk about it at conferences, about the work that we were doing at conferences, and other people would say, oh, we'd like to be able to use those communication books, those page sets, and I would give them and loan them, I would give them to people, examples of
Mm-hmm.
templates I'd made for the children I worked with, and like you described, it didn't go well. People made changes to them, and oh no, they're not
Right.
working, and so it became obvious that the careful development, the design in them was not easily transferable or made by other people. So we released the template resource, and since then it's been a lot easier for other people to implement.
Sure. So they can adapt it, right? They can adapt the resource to the needs.
Yeah, so that the basic design features are there for communication books, from early functions through to complex syntax language, and people can make the individual customizations without actually having to know how to design them from scratch, which is a lot of work.
Sure, I bet. So it's a work in progress, basically, right? You started developing and then you keep getting feedback. And I know your collection is growing and growing because from direct access, you have other versions that allow kids with vision issues or other type with access issues to use the system in a way that's more efficient and fits their needs.
Yeah, and we developed the generic resources that were not, for many, many years we've had all of those access methods for our clients, but there's a step to then make it generic so that it works across many people. Yeah.
Sure. And many cultures and languages,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, yes, the people from Denmark were the first who came very quickly the following year and translated into Danish, and now it's been translated into Norwegian and Swedish and Dutch, French.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there are other translations that are in development but not quite commercially available as yet. So, yeah.
Next question then. So who can benefit from PODD? Can you just give a description or range? You talk about your clients, the people you support in Australia and now across the world, but are there a specific population that could really benefit from your system?
PODD provides, it's a single meaning pictographic system. So for those individuals who as yet can't spell whatever's in their head to communicate, it provides them with a well-organised vocabulary that can support them to communicate at any time. So it really is anyone who needs a single meaning, pictographic system to support either their understanding or their expression. The actual templates that are commercially available have perhaps more of a child, adolescent bent in the vocabulary, but many people have found that they work quite well with some vocabulary changes, particularly for activities and some language changes to use with adults who have a congenital disability. Diagnostic groups include anyone with complex communication needs, so cerebral palsy and all of the variations of sensory motor challenges, global developmental delay, autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, anyone.
It's a
broad range of people. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you have different levels, right? Your books and your version for speech generated devices have multiple levels. You have preschool, school, and then 15 plus 60. So the number of cells is different according to the abilities of the user, the person that's going to use your system, correct?
Yeah. When you look at selecting a PODD book or template, the first thing you do is look at what language the person requires. So Goossens, Crane and Alder, who were the people who originally sort of wrote the book, if you like, on aided language stimulation as an intervention technique, they say that you want to make a system big enough to grow into, but not so big that you trip over it, like you buy clothes for a toddler. And so it's important that we have page sets that support people right from first words through to being able to produce complex sentences in their language. So there are different page sets that you always select one that has more vocabulary, more complexity in the language than the individual can currently use, so that you use the system to model that language within natural interactions. And that's how they learn. That's how we all learn language. So, but you don't want it to be so big, such small cells, such complexity of language as to make it tricky for the person at the, beginning stages of language. Yeah. And there are many features in the earlier PODD page sets for devices and PODD communication books that support people at the earliest stages of language development to be more intelligible, to be more able to express themselves with a broader range of people more efficiently. So there are particular strategies in PODD that help that person be intelligible without relying on the few people who know what they might be talking about, or without, talk for themselves without people having to guess what do you mean by that. So
right, that as you say, being able to say what you want to say when you want to say it.
whenever, wherever. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes,
So,
yes.
yeah.
How important is the role of a communication partner? Because one of the things that is very powerful in PODD, in my opinion, is the fact that with the books, you certainly need someone that it's not something that the child can do alone. Communication is a two-way thing. It's an interaction between people. And so how important it is, the role of the communication partner when using a PODD system.
If we look at the definitions of communication competence by Janice Light, very much it says that communication competence is co-constructed. It's the skills of the partner with the skills of the individual. And in the earlier stages of language development, that becomes even more critical. Does the partner know how to provide that person for time to speak for themselves? When we're learning a language, we learn language best through interaction with two people trying to be understood by the other person and understand the other person. That's how we learn language best. I'm sure most people know that from a second language learning perspective. You learn it best if you interact using that language rather than if you learn words in the classroom. Yeah.
Yes.
And with first language, we know that language is learned during the interactions of daily life with the people in your family and community. And so it is very critical that people use the augmentative and alternative communication systems to talk to, early learners so that they can see how words are used, how they're combined together into sentences, how they create meaning. It's not just learning a word. You have to learn how to use it. And the only way to learn how to use language is to experience it used. It's also much simpler. There is something in human beings where when they're trying to understand other people and be understood, the language is learnt best.
Wonderful. One other question. Who can use PODD with students or clients? Are there specific requirements to become certified? Because I know you have a system, a program for certifications, and people have to do different steps and follow different classes to become a certified PODD trainer. So what are the requirements, and are there different levels of training and certifications that are offered to teachers and therapists?
So when I designed the PODD template resources, I included in them a printable book and a lot of information in files about each book and how to construct them. So if you, the aim is that to use the PODD book, you should be able to do that from the resource if you, study the information on the resource. If you understand the information on the resource, you should be able to do it from the resource. In terms of implementing it with your child or your student or the person you're helping to develop it, there is information to help you do that. Most people actually prefer to come to some training, which is interactive, to help them with that process. And
sure.
There are introductory PODD workshops which help you know how to select and customize it. As I said, all that information is in the research source, but people prefer to come to face-to-face training.
Right? Yeah, it's easier.
You smell it, you taste it, rather than just read it.
Correct.
There's introductory PODD workshops, which are 2 day. There are also PODD trainings that people who are certified PODD presenters can do. So if there's 1 day communication partner trainings that you might do with your own client groups or evening sessions to help people learn how to use the book to model the language, and for those people who take a primary role in helping them learn. not all of those people need to come to a 2-day workshop because someone else selects and customizes the book for them, with them. Then there are, some other workshop trainings that are specifically about alternative access, that are about the speech generating devices, or a range of different sort of particular face-to-face trainings.
So they're more focused on other aspects that complement PODD, part of PODD.
There is an advanced workshop which provides people with better skills to provide communication partner training, and more detailed case study and refining information to extend your knowledge and your practice. And then once people have attended an advanced 5-day workshop, they can then apply for certification to be a trainer. And that is a mentored process with me, and they have to do a case study, and they have to co-present a 2-day workshop with me. So there's a range of strategies to do the PODD training. So I suppose, as a professional, and even sometimes as a parent, you have to be able to show communication partners how to use the system, because that's part of the intervention. And attending a 2-day workshop will help you with that, and attending a 5-day advanced workshop will give you more skills to do that.
Right.
But in terms of being the person to train other people to administer 5-day not the 5-day, to administer the 2-day training, you have to be certified as a PODD trainer, so that I can assure that the information that people are transmitting are correct, and that they can answer the questions and provide more information.
Yeah. So to be a trainer, an official trainer, you need to be certified, because then you are going to make sure that the information is correct and reflect the principles and of the system. But if you want to use PODD, the instructions in the system that are provided with the system are enough to help people to use the template.
If you read it all.
If you read it all, right.
If you actually study out what's with the resources.
Are there YouTube videos or things that are available online to complement and expand, maybe, or clarify what is included in the system?
There is some information online, but not in a highly organised manner. Sometimes it can be varying quality, depending on where it comes from. In terms of Europe, and Italy, there are not currently any certified PODD trainers in Italy.
Okay.
So there are certified PODD trainers in Europe. And there is a website, PODD EU.
Okay.
PODD Europe, that updates people on who the European PODD trainers are, and where workshops are within Europe. Yeah. So that's a good place for Europeans to have a look for what training is. We'd love to have some Italian.
Yes.
But yes.
Let's hope that this conversation starts some movement. Right. Okay. One other question that is actually related to this last piece of discussion. I know that PODD has been translated into different languages. So what are your recommendations, your suggestions, and requirements to have a localized version of your communication system? Because as you just said, there is no PODD in Italian. And so what would be necessary, in your opinion, to start the process? What are the minimum requirements to start something in Italian?
Okay, so there's usually a number of steps that a language group goes through. in this process. The first one is usually that people work from the English. And working from the English is the best solution, not to try and create something from yourself. Okay? So somebody often will translate from the English version, which has features in it, and it's much easier to do from the English, even when we're dealing with quite different languages, like some of the Asian languages. It's much better to start from the English rather than just hear one or two features and try and create something. That hasn't even worked for the English people. Start from the official English templates, and often then, where people translate a little bit for their own client group. It's not an official resource yet, but that's to get some experience where many people would start translating directly from the English template. So buying the English templates and then translating the language and then using it. It's pragmatic.
Yeah, using it.
It's pragmatic. So the use of it is necessary to actually work out some of the finer details in the language group. In terms of it, when we're looking, that's often where people have started, And then there's somebody in that language group who says, I want to take on the role of being an official translator and creating a official translation in that language. And they contact me and we talk about that. I prefer that person to have done more PODD training than just the introductory, to have done the advanced training. People a more detailed knowledge. And then for each language group, there is a contractual arrangement where I will identify that person and we'll have an agreement that they have my agreement to do the translation in that language. So that ensures that, sort of their work is protected. Is that
correct?
It ends up with what's called a dependent copyright, whereby both of us own the copyright. Does that make sense? In a text or, so we'd identify a person who did that and then they would help with my support to create that translation. And, there are often periods of time where people go, in our language it does this, and we work out what might be the PODD solution for that language translation. So the people who have done the translations come from a whole variety of backgrounds. It is very helpful if there is someone in their team or they have access to someone who has knowledge of the language development in that language. What is the developmental process in that language? I think Italian you'll find that there are quite similarities because of the English-Latin roots. So that will help.
Okay.
So hopefully.
Perfect.
But, it's fine for people to take the templates, the English templates, and do sort of a base translation. And it is a necessary process to do that, to have something to use to find out where the differences might be.
Right. And of course you need a group to test it while you're developing. You need kids actually using the system to be sure that the translation is accurate and efficient and it works correctly.
There have definitely been updates to certain of the languages. So, often people don't want to do the 15, 20 years of use that we've had before we released it. There is in languages like we release something commercially and then 5 years later we update it. But people have had good translations in the meantime.
Okay, one last question. Can you suggest resources, articles, books to learn more about PODD for people in Italy who would like to know more about the system. Is there something written and available in the Italian market? Are there resources that, even if are not in Italian, they could be easy for people to get and read and know more about PODD?
So when I did the training at Benedetta
Tintino, yes, in Milan. What year was that training, Gail?
It was a 2-day introductory training, but because we had such a large group, we unfortunately didn't have the chance to do the practical use of the system in Italian.
Okay.
So it was a little bit different from a regular 2-day because of that.
Okay.
So people didn't, because we didn't have the resources in Italian to do that with. When I did that, I gave permission for the printable book and manual to be given as the handout in Italian.
Okay.
I translated that into Italian, and I gave permission for them to share that with the Italian market. So there is actually a translated version of the theory book, if you like, that comes on the resource. Yeah, so the theory book.
And that is available at you left it at the Benedetta Dintino, so the people that are interested in getting this resource should contact the organization Benedetta Dintino and get it from them, right? Correct?
I'm trying to remember who had it that they were going to give it to, but that would be a good place to ask.
Start.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. And any other resource that it's available that come to mind that you can think of?
I mean, there are resources in English, but that would be the best resource in Italian. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, people have bought any of the resources, the alternative access, any of those resources, then that information is included in that in English. But yeah.
Now, where are your books available? Your other resources in English or in other languages available? If someone would like to buy your books, where should they go?
They can order them online from the Cerebral Palsy Education Centre.
Okay.
Yeah. There's an online shop where you can order the English versions.
Okay. I'll put a link on this interview at the end.
I think in the UK, Inclusive Technologies sells them. Okay. But if you're in Italy, it might be easy to get them from Australia. I think because the Cerebral Palsy Education Centre, CPEC,
yes,
is the publisher. I think they're a little cheaper from Australia.
Oh, all right, good.
Yeah.
If someone would like to buy your PODD system, where should they go, and what kind of reseller should they contact to get your material? Should they contact the organization in Australia that you just mentioned, the Cerebral Palsy organization?
Yeah, they can buy it through the online shop.
Okay.
It might take a little bit to get there from Australia.
Yes, but it's cheaper then. It's more convenient, I guess. Yeah.
Hold on. Yeah. I mean, if you look at PODD EU, there are also, if someone is, it's also you need to use the resource, you need Boardmaker, and I don't know how widely Boardmaker is used in Italy.
Some therapists and some teachers and families, yes, they are familiar with Boardmaker. It's an all-time software application, so yeah, I know that a lot of people.
But if someone has a second language in French or something, and they find that easier, there is a French version. If you have a look on PODD EU, you can. contact
Yes.
some of the other language presenters.
Right. There is the version for Mind Express that we worked on, which is in English.
The version in Mind Express, but that's the electronic.
That's the electronic version, correct, yes.
Yeah. I was just thinking there might be some Italians whose second language is French, or
yes,
find it easier to translate from the French. Yeah.
Well, our time is about up, and so we will be ending our interview. At this time, I would like to thank Gayle Porter for sharing her knowledge and expertise today. And I would also like to thank you, our audience, for your attention. I hope we will have an opportunity in the near future to talk again with Gayle and get an update on her future endeavors. And maybe there is something that will come out from this interview in the Italian market for the Italian users. Let's hope so. Gayle, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Fio.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.